Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Miss Patience Nemapare from Midland State University in Gweru, Zimbabwe. I would like to welcome you all to this Zimbabwe Dialogue series that we are going to be hosting, and we are going to be talking about commercializing the use of wild plants in Zimbabwe. It is a very interesting topic, and as you are well aware, that Zimbabwe is its first ever Zimbabwe Biodiversity Report that it launched in May 2023. So we'd like to discuss about commercializing the use of wild plants. I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. We have Ms. Jacqueline and Dr. Lizzie from Bindura University. Over to you, speakers. Thank you.
Okay, let me start. Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline Jacquet. I'm the project manager at Bioinnovation Zimbabwe, which is a local Zimbabwean NGO. We work with smallholder farmers across the country and help them to commercialize what is commonly referred to as underutilized or neglected species.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Lizzie Mjuru from Bindura University, also standing in as the head of delegation for GBIF Zimbabwe, which is Global Biodiversity Information Facility. I'm also a lecturer in forestry, mainly dealing with non-timber forest products and other forest-related issues, including climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over the floor to Prudence to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prudence Ngomo, and I'm here on behalf of ShareScreen Africa, and I'll be in conversation with Caroline and Dr. Mujuru. So to start off our conversation, I think I'd start with you, Dr. Mujuru, and I think based on the Zimbabwe's Biodiversity Report of 2023, how would you contextualize that with non-timber products?
Thank you very much. The report actually covers critical issues concerning non-timber forest products, and it has covered not only the wildlife, but it has also included plants, both food plants and also wild and medicinal plants. So in a way, I think it's the step in the right direction.
And I think, so the biodiversity report, the first one, we had a kind of like an overview on what it looks at. And then the second one, last week, we looked a little bit at communities. And I know that in terms of looking at wild plants, there's a big part of communities. And I've seen a lot of the work that you've done. How do you see this being made relevant in terms of policies and regulations? How do you see the biodiversity report and the work you've done on wild plants? How do you see those two working out?
I think we still have some work to do as a nation, because we still have some of our old policies that are supposed to be functional, but what is on the ground is not, because we are saying non-timber forest products, but we have another policy piece of legislation, the Communal Land Forest Produce Act, which prohibits people from commercializing indigenous species. So in that way, we still have some little bit of work to do, but otherwise we are good to go. And also the people are aware of the value of the non-timber forest products.
Cool. I'd come to you, Caroline. I think for starters, I'd like you to give people a baseline introduction to what bio innovation does and some of the work that you get involved in there.
Sure. So we work with we work with both, but today I'm only going to talk about the wild plants, but we also work with underutilized traditional cultivated crops, you know, like your small grains, your bambara nuts, etc. But so on the sort of like wild plant part of our work, we work with very many different wild plants. You know, those can be plants or plant parts that are ingredients in food and beverages. You know, talking of wild fruits such as baobab, marula, bird plum, herbal teas as well, resurrection bush, sumbani, edible nuts. We do a lot of work around edible nuts as well, marula, hacha or mobola plum nuts. But obviously, I think probably the most known sort of like application of wild plants or plant parts is as you know, when they're pressed into natural oils for cosmetic applications. So obviously a lot of nuts and seeds that we work with that are edible can also be used for natural oils. Again, marula, mongongo, manketi, ziminia or wild plum, sour plum, Kalahari melon. We also work with plants and plant parts that have medicinal uses. Just to name a few, gotakula, devil's claw. And sometimes we also are just asked to find plants or plant parts that just have an ornamental application. Like I think some people are probably familiar with resurrection bush. And you know what happens when you sort of like water these seemingly dead sticks? It's like little miracle that happens when the leaves go green again. So we actually have quite a bit of a market for resurrection bush as an ornamental as well. Most of the species that we work with have multiple sort of uses or applications. So, you know, different parts of the plants can be either used for food and for oils, or even the very same plant parts can have, you know, multiple applications. And to be honest, as biz, we prefer to work with species that also have a food application, because then, you know, if a market fails to show up, you know, the plant can still be consumed by the collectors and by the, you know, the local communities, which is a bit harder when you work with a plant that, for example, has a cosmetic application. You know, then it's quite hard to find hyper local markets for those things. So our interventions center around teaching communities how to sustainably harvest, how to pre-process, you know, how to basically make them ready to certification as well, to link them to, you know, markets. But like I said, a lot of our interventions also center around nutrition, share recipes, share value addition, product ideas with producers, especially the youth. So that they can see local links to local markets, basically. Because that's, for us, we've seen that's the only way we can kind of involve youth in NTFP work, because NTFP work usually just attracts the elderly female villagers, really. That's basically what we do.
Cool. In terms of commercialization, because it sounds like it's such a big word, I know there's some of the work that you've already done with bioinnovation on that. How has that played out? Have you had to start small? Are you only doing it in Zimbabwe? Do you have a bigger market outside, or has it just been trading within the region? How has that kind of worked out?
So no, I mean, initially we were mostly looking at export markets, like overseas markets, because somehow we thought that you're only taken seriously if you export. But then actually we have in the last few years really shifted more towards domestic and regional markets, all sorts of reasons, from an increased interest locally in these plant and plant parts. But also for us as Zimbabwe, also the very high costs that are associated with exporting Not just the exorbitant freight costs. We are a landlocked country, but also a lot of the costs that people associate with exporting as well, which are to do with certification, lab testing, novel foods, and things like that. So we have really, and as one of the sort of like probably successes or winning business models, I would definitely say look at local offtake first. That's really, really worked for us. And then don't just go for niche off-takers, like your small natural oil producers who then make, soaps and lotions. Those are too small. So more and more in Zimbabwe, we've got the very large domestic food and beverage manufacturers who are actually incorporating baobab powder, herbal teas, nuts, flowers, etc. in their products.
Interesting. Dr. Mujura, I just want to ask, I know you've also looked at the socioeconomic dynamics of, I have read, of non-timber forestry products. Would you like to chip in on that in terms of commercialization? How has that, I know you did it in Muzarabani, but how did that data look like, and how does that feed into the bigger context of commercializing non-timber forestry products?
Thank you very much. In terms of our non-timber forest products, I think the issue of value addition is still missing. We find in Muzarabani there's a lot of Zimbabwe Mauritania, which is the Masau, a lot of it, and but then it's being sold as raw, and you find it in markets in these 50 kg bags. We are happy that there are some institutions that are now taking a way forward in trying now to make juice out of the Masau, and also some locals are also doing some experiments, although at a local scale, which I think with some help, I think they are able to boost their value addition drive. And we also need to look for markets for those things, because that can be also another critical thing that needs to be looked at.
Dr. Mujuru, would you like to tell us what are non-timber forest products? I think we've spoken about them, we've spoken about wild plants, but maybe a small little definition of what those were for those who do not know.
Okay. Non-timber forest products are products from the forest which are not timber. So these products include our fruits, our medicines, the leaves that we collect for food. It can also include our small animals or our wild animals. It can also go another extent to include even ecotourism at local level. So everything that we get, which is not timber, including firewood and charcoal, all those are non-timber forest products.
Cool, thank you. Patience, just to put you on the spot a little bit. I know you're doing your PhD on wild fruits. Would you like to chip in a little bit on that here?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm doing a PhD on indigenous fruit under the Indigenous Fruit and Herbs Grant, which is spearheaded by the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education in Zimbabwe. So I'm focusing on indigenous fruit. And recently, last year, I published a manuscript, an article on just a review of all the indigenous fruits that are found in Zimbabwe, in a bid to try and create a database. I know we have authors like Trade Gold, who did a survey in the whole of Zimbabwe, but some of that information is now lost. You'll be surprised that at a university you may even not get a book on indigenous fruit. So we are trying to capture that knowledge before it is lost. So one of the highlights that I would like to talk about is that some of these indigenous fruits have gone extinct because of various unsustainable harvesting methods, and even the issue of deforestation. So it's an issue that is needs to be rectified. So I'm sure everyone can access my article on the internet. I think I'll share the link so that you can read more about the indigenous fruits that are found in Zimbabwe. However, Zimbabwe is very, very rich in indigenous fruit and even wild plants themselves, medicinal herbs. So it's an initiative that is even coming from the government down to the universities so that we can try to value add and these indigenous fruit and actually capture the knowledge that is getting lost over time. Thank you.
Cool, interesting. Caroline, I know you mentioned something about the lack of scientific research on certain things and backing, but I mean, I grew up in Zimbabwe, so half the things you speak about, I've eaten them without even asking twice whether it was okay to eat it. I just found it at home, I ate it, and we moved on with our lives. But I wonder if there's any potential risks between you and Dr. Mujuru of any potential risk or negative impacts, challenges in terms of getting that into the market and getting that information to somebody. I have a housemate and she's from KZN, and there's times where I come with fruits back from Zim and we find that we know the same fruit in a different name, but we both eat it without thinking twice. But I don't know if you see any negative impacts of trying to get that to a market beyond just Zimbabweans maybe, and what that would look like.
Okay, thank you. I don't see a big problem as long as our resource base is taken care of, because that is the critical issue. If we can commercialize and give and have a market, but then normally what happens is when there is a market, like what if you have seen what happened in Matebeleland with our mopane worms.
Yeah.
People were now coming even beyond the borders to come and harvest the mopane worms. But if they are not locals now, the way they harvest, they don't care about the sustainability. Some were even cutting down the tree so that they harvest all the mopane worms that are in there. They don't care about what comes next year. So I think there will need for support for the locals if we are dealing with the, these non-timber forest products, so that at least they remain sustainable.
I'll like chip in here. Good question. I mean, so as Bio-Innovation Zimbabwe, we don't launch anything on the market ourselves because we are just like the middleman, if you want, between community collector communities and the market. And to be honest, we mostly work from a pool. It's the market requesting certain ingredients, and then we try and find, you know, the raw materials for them. So even though, of course, we get told by communities, we also have this and that, and we can introduce those ingredients to private sector. You know, we don't really launch weird and wonderful things on the market just like that. But just to you know, reiterate what Dr. Mujuru was saying, obviously for us, whenever we get a request for an ingredient or a plant part or something, we always start with a resource assessment first. And that is really so that we can ensure sustainable offtake volumes. And then, so not only do we kind of know what can be sustainably extracted out of a certain area within a year, we then also obviously monitoring of those, you know, of that offtake is very important as well. And not just the offtake, but also how the actual harvesting is done. So you know, we involve the collector groups, the district authorities, but even the private sector. They all, you know, they all commit to making sure that harvesting is done sustainably. And then, you know, there's the access and benefit sharing legislation as well. Not really much implemented in Zimbabwe, but still, it's very important that benefits are also reinvested in the actual resources, and so that commercializing wild plants somehow also benefits the entire community, not just the collectors involved in the direct transactions, basically.
Thank you. Dr. Mujuru, just to come back to you, Caroline spoke a bit about harvesting, and I'd like to know from your end, what are some of the sustainable forest management practices that can support this? You've said some people come and cut down the big tree, and that doesn't exactly work. So what are some of the sustainable management practices? Please unmute. Sorry.
All right, the main one is actually going for community-based forest management, where the communities actually are empowered to manage the resources. Then the other one would be, now if the communities are empowered, we have our sustainable harvesting practices, which we have some quotas or some restrictions in terms of seasons, something like that, to allow regeneration, also as a way of promoting sustainability. We can also have our monitoring, regular monitoring.
Yes.
Because there are some species which can actually become extinct. A good example is we went for this survey in Wange, where we were doing some medicinal plants. They were actually saying some of the medicinal plants are no longer available in the area. And now if they want those medicinal plants, they have to risk their lives and go into the park to get these medicines because they really need them. So in such cases, now you may need to actually domesticate some of the species, maybe in agroforestry or just home planting, so that at least they get them, they don't risk their lives in going very far to collect. So those are some of the issues that can promote sustainability. Of course, we need to continue researching and developing and making sure that we become efficient in terms of the utilization of the resources. Then capacity building for the communities and for everyone who will be involved. I think that would be good for us.
Caroline, anything to add from your side?
No, I mean, just to reiterate that, resource assessments are very important. Monitoring of offtake and sustainable harvesting, impact assessments as well. We also involve private sector in impact assessments. But for me, also just sticking to a very few basic regulations in Zimbabwe that are not much followed often by districts, to just have, because a lot of wild harvesting is unregulated, it's informal trade. But for district authorities to stick to issuing harvesting permits, and for Forestry Commission to stick to people needing movement permits, that would already give a very good idea, or a much better idea, of what's actually happening. Because you have the ones like us who try and stick to all the rules, but then you also have the ones who just drive in with pickup trucks and just ask communities to fill the pickup truck and then just drive back out, and that's sort of like unregulated informal trade. If already that could somehow be regulated a bit better, I think that would very much help as well.
Interesting. So I just want to let everybody know that you can put questions in the chat, and you can lift up your virtual hand if you would like to. We will not have a designated Q&A, so if you'd like to ask a question in between, you're welcome to just chip in and speak your mind. I think over the every time when there's a topic about local communities, there's always a topic that comes up on capacitation, on what community-based natural resource management looks like. I don't know if you've got any practical examples of how you're chipping on that as bio-innovation, but also if Dr. Mujuru maybe has some examples of how she sees it working out. I know we've touched a bit on this, but how do you say it? Like, do you think people should go into communities and teach them and get them capacitated and then being able to take their products elsewhere? Or is it important to also bring in maybe the private sector and they play a better role in catapulting to the next stage?
Thank you. I can say, of course, the communities can work up to the capacity that they can, but I think we really need the private sector to chip in, of course, without exploiting them, so that they all benefit fairly. So if the private sector can come in, where possible, if the government can also assist, because like if we look at things like the marula, cracking that nut is actually a hard one. So if they can be assisted with some of these technologies to just make it lighter for the communities, somebody can chip in and then they assist, and we boost we empower and boost the communities so that at least it's easier. I think it can work.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously looked at equipment, sort of like, small manual equipment that can be used by collectors to make their work easier, and also to boost volumes, obviously. But we have often faced issues with quality when collectors are involved too much into processing. And we have a lot of private sector who actually prefer to just source whole nuts and whole fruits from communities and do the processing in Harare or even outside Zimbabwe. And even though, of course, we would like to empower communities and sort of like get them further up the value chain, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we're dealing with very new and novel ingredients here. And so we're already trying to convince a market who is not always necessarily looking for these ingredients, because there's a lot of alternative, probably sometimes easier ingredients. And so if you then on top of that, if they on top of that also struggling with issues of quality, where nuts are too broken or contaminated, I often say to collectors, we only have one chance to convince the market. So let's make sure that we do things right, and that unfortunately often means that in a first instance, and I'm not saying down the line, maybe in the years to come it could change, but in a first instance it means minimal processing at village level.
Just a personal question anyway. I know research always goes kind of one way, or whatever the goal is, but I want to know that from your experience, Dr. Mujuru, patients as a PhD candidate, and you, Carola, from your work that you do, when you get some of the scientific knowledge that you get about the plants that you find that the communities do not know about, do you go back and give them that knowledge and find ways for them? Because I know there's ways in which we use indigenous fruits and plants in our normal lives, but there's, like, I knew sorghum always as porridge or as mealie meal, but I've seen people now make sorghum into flour, and then they bake with it and all these things. Do you take the knowledge back, reverse, and tell them that, okay, we've learned that this thing does this? And because I know you speak a bit partly of your work in terms of food insecurity and addressing that and how that helps them in an economic way, but in a social manner, do you go back and say, we've learned that Masawu can do this, and so do you want to try it? And are they interested in that? Do you have to do it in the native language, or do you have to then get it in the manner that you got it?
Thank you. In most cases, when we get what we get, and we have been working with communities, normally we share the results. If it is a project, we actually go back and share the results with the communities. And you find that, like when we were doing medicinal plants, the sharing of that information, they were quite happy, because some people actually took some plants for granted. But then from those meetings now, they understood that almost all plants have value. So we normally do some sharing. If we get some funding also, we can also do some value addition to some extent with the communities.
Okay, I wanted to add on to what Doc said. When we go to the communities, usually we just don't go, we go via the DA, the chiefs, the headmen. So we have an agreement with them to say when we find the results, we have to share with them. Just like the indigenous fruit research that we are doing. When we are done with it, we'll go back to the communities and look for possible ways to collaborate with them. If nowadays, most universities now have what we call innovation hubs, where we grow ideas. So when we want to now go back to the community, because that is where the indigenous fruit are, we will try to create opportunities for those people in the communities. And now answering the question which is on the chat, where they are saying the people in the communities are known as the harvesters. Do they get a chance to be part of the value chain, like processing and making of the product? Yes, they can be part of that. Because when a company or when a university or an innovation industry is coming into the community, it is mandated to actually take the people from the community so that they benefit from their natural resources. So when we now want to make a startup company, let's say juice production from Masao or maybe juice production from Mazanje, we rope in that community and the people there can get employed in the event that maybe there is a startup company that is being set up in that community.
Wonderful. Yes, Caroline.
Sorry, I was very eager to come in. We obviously always share. As I was already highlighting earlier, we our interventions have nutrition sort of like aspects to it. And that is for us, we have found the best way to attract the youth, because youth are not so much interested in long walks to the forest and sitting under a tree and cracking nuts, but they're interested in small businesses.
Yeah.
So yeah, those nutrition sort of like trainings definitely give them ideas for small businesses. But also private sector. We also ask private sector to share what they do with the sort of like raw materials or plant parts or ingredients that they buy from communities. So at the very least, we have samples of the products that are being made by private sector, and we bring those back to the communities. We show them what's being done with with their products, but very often also we ask private sector to look at distributing, where relevant, their products with the communities that they have sourced ingredients for. So if you have a company, for example, that makes a porridge and they've incorporated baobab powder in that porridge, we very much like to see that porridge also sold from small shops and tuck shops, etc., in the districts where the baobab powder was bought from.
Cool. There's a question in the chat from Maibomwe. They ask that how can we commercialize these wild fruits? They're typically found in forests when no one can claim ownership.
So we do not allow harvesting from forests. So unless they are communal forests. So anything that belongs to national parks, anything that is protected, whatever, communities are not allowed to go in there for harvesting. That's number one. So if for example a species is not found in sufficient volumes, in the communal areas where they are allowed to harvest, we will look at propagation. That's probably the best we can do at that point. But yeah, we as Bioinnovation Zimbabwe, we do not allow harvesting from national parks and protected forests.
Yeah, it's quite tricky though, because people still go.
Yes.
They can go by night.
Yeah.
If you go into big cities, most of the big towns, if you just follow any main road around 2 a.m., you will see wonders. a lot of scotch carts, lorries, and cars coming in from forests into town to come and sell firewood. So it's really very, very, very difficult to really say people cannot go, because they will still go. But maybe we need some regulations that actually restrict those illegal activities, so that people can do it legally. For fruits, normally it's daytime, so they can be regularized, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know how do you propagate a baobab tree if you want the fruit then? I don't know how that would work out, Caroline, in that instance.
Well, luckily we have a lot of baobab trees outside national parks in Zimbabwe, so that's not really an issue for us. But baobab is very easy to propagate. It's just you will have to wait for about 70 years before you get your first fruits. But yeah, most of these, but that's why we also try, and that's why we always start with a resource assessment. So that we link the right collector communities with the right species to the right markets. And yeah, if it's not found in your area, we'll look for another area. At the moment, like what Patience was saying, there's the natural resources in Zimbabwe are bountiful. So there's no need to go into national parks with taken into account also that it's quite dangerous. So.
Oh, Chris Ndlovu, I see you had your hand up and you had a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a question to Lizzie. I heard you mentioning that, look, if maybe we are to consider regulations around the non-timber products, and then maybe that would work. But I think Caroline mentioned that we have put some laws in Zimbabwe and they are rarely followed. And if you check, mainly the reason for this informal trade or informal business, it goes beyond conservation. It goes beyond to the economic aspect of the country and all those other issues that we are aware of. So, as institutes that are managing and trying to protect the environment, what is your contributing in trying to address the root cause? Because here to say we are just putting regulations around protecting timber, it's just like you are bandaging a cancer, saying that it will heal, yet the problem is within. So what is your contribution in that aspect? Because I think if you go deeper into that aspect, you understand the Zimbabwean situation. It's beyond that issue, that the reason why those people are doing it at night. You might find that maybe one of those people who are doing that is one of your staff who go by night and go and harvest firewood because they don't have all those other aspects. So that's the reality. So what can you do about that? And also, I just put a comment again on chat saying, look, around the issue of this issue of land reform and climate change, they've also contributed to this extinct of many of the wild non-timber products. So even if we are talking of regulation, so my main question there is just to say, what are the contributions that you guys can do beyond regulation that at least will address the economic issues of the country, so that we can reduce all these other factors that are really affecting the environment at large? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a hard one, which is very difficult to answer, because we know that for that situation to occur, it was not there before. So we can say it's like something that emerged over the past few years, but it's mainly because of the economic hardships that have actually driven people to seek for alternatives for their survival. And normally the forest is the easiest because you don't pay anything, you just go and you collect. So I still think that some people have been trying now to empower these people by maybe looking at projects that can create some employment. This is why you find some of the projects are creating gardens, they are creating fish ponds, it's just trying to take these people away from from the forest and trying to make a livelihood. So you find there are projects that are trying to take people away from the forest by just creating some form of livelihood, even some supply of reddish meat through these goat projects. So I think that's what we are trying. I'm not sure if I did justice to that one.
I would say so that we don't change the debate anyhow, let's continue because it might maybe beyond your your scope, but I'm not really convinced. Thank you.
But maybe I can also just chip in. I mean, obviously, we know that the people who are poaching, or even the ones who sort of officially are involved in wild collection, I mean, they are the very poor people in communities, because it's usually something you do as a last resort. And obviously, when you're poor and hungry, it's a bit hard to think sort of like long-term and future generations and things like that. But we have seen that as BioInnovation Zimbabwe, when we really focus on sustainability, quality, fair pricing, that is what our private sector partners are also looking for. So they come to BIZ because they know that if they source wild plant ingredients through us, or if they get linked to communities via us, that they are assured that things, hopefully as much as possible, will be done sustainably, and that quality is assured. And for us, it's helped us find markets to ensure those things. So private sector is they also want to do things clean and green, and so we have found that really hammering on those things actually does help us open and create markets.
Thank you, Chris. Nobuhle, you have a question. You can unmute and ask your question.
Thanks, Prudence. Thank you very much to the speakers. So my question is on community capacity building, empowerment, and the integration of indigenous knowledge systems. So like Prudence mentioned, there are many values that come with either Baobab beyond economic. This is just an example. In some cases, there are cultural values as well. So I just want to understand from the doctor if there are any models, or if anything is being done to integrate indigenous knowledge systems into the conservation of wild fruits, and making sure that communities understand the value, therefore they are more motivated to act as community monitors and make sure there isn't overexploitation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. But as you know, generally, in areas where there's not been a project that is shown the value of non-timber forest products, we normally do not take them as very important. And this is also even reflected in our national economics. The non-timber forest products are not even considered. What is considered in our national accounting is the plantations that are in Manicaland and those in Matabeleland. So you find the problem is actually at national level, and it goes down to the communities. But through innovations that have been occurring, like what Caroline has been highlighting, people are now beginning to actually see the importance. And in terms of indigenous knowledge, it's mostly the medicinals which have the critical information, because traditionally medicinal plants were a preserve of a few people. It was my grandfather. Then in the family, my grandfather would choose me and then confide in me those medicines. But due to these interactions now, people are actually seeing that most of the trees, they're actually valuable. Some know that they are valuable. So I think it's helping in a way, because it's now being incorporated. The food plans for us to be able that this can taste good as porridge and the like. Some of it comes from the communities. They know. So it's actually being incorporated. Thank you.
We had a question earlier from Anthony, and he's still here. Anthony, would you like to unmute and share your insights?
Hi, Prudence.
Hello.
I'm Austin. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Cool.
Right. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Right. I've been to Mzarabani and those areas, and I've looked at the different trees that people harvest the fruits from. They harvest those fruits, bring them to Harare, in most cases, or to towns where people will then consume them. And the people get very little from it. Of course, I understand that there are also people who are working very hard to try and process the fruits into some products that can then be used. But what I found is that the fruits don't have a consistent quality. You know, the quality changes all the time. Like you get one tree, the fruits are excellent, they're very good, very big, pulpy, and yeah, they're very tasty. You go to the next one, it's, sorry for using the word, but rubbish, if you like. But that they are not so good. And so you can't really process them, you can't compare them. And also the people who are making wine, those juices from Marura, the Amarula trees are also quite prone to insects, to insect attack. And the taste is not consistent. And so I was wondering if there is a way that people can actually use to select specific traits that they want to produce specific products. Like people who are making wine from Amalura, for example, they may want a specific type of fruit that would produce the quality that is wanted by the market. But if you are going to go into the forest every time to harvest fruit, you'd find the quality is not consistent. And I was wondering if there are people who are working on trying to select the quality that is good for the market, the quality that is required by the market, and perhaps encourage people to grow them in their own household orchard. I think that would help. You imagine if you have got 50 people in an area and each family has 2 or 3 maluras in their backyard. This can also be done through, I think, this is just me thinking. People having community forests that have these fruits for harvesting. Like people in Zaraban, for example, they can select a specific area where they can grow the masaus or grow the amaluras of the quality that they want, so that we actually improve their livelihoods from that. And I listened to Caroline saying that it's difficult to grow the baobab, but that's not quite true, because I think in West Africa, they've managed to grow the baobab from cuttings. And they've actually found out that you can harvest the fruits within 5 years, 7 years, if you do it from cuttings. And so you can drastically reduce the waiting period from several years to just a few years. And in the botanic garden, we have grown some baobabs from seed. After about 20 years, we are now eating the fruit. They are now fruiting. So that was grown from seed. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if we put our heads together and really work, it should be possible to actually select trees that have traits that we want to meet the market demand. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. That is a good insight, which I think has been applied to most of our commercial exotic fruit. I think that's how they've improved them over time. So I think that is a thing that we can also work on because definitely in the forest, you find the sweet, the sour, the big and the small. All those varieties are there. But the need to propagate the plants with the required traits, yes, that is very, very, very possible. And I think if we can use cuttings and other methods of propagation, which are vegetative, I think we can get our results earlier than waiting for the results from seed. And also seed can actually also betray us, because we don't know if the pollination was from the sweet or the sour, then you will have the wrong fruit again. So I think vegetative propagation will be the sure assurance for us to get the right traits that we want. I agree with you.
But I just want to say, you know, when communities plant trees, they've always been selected, because they've always, if it's for consumption or if it's for the market, they will have picked the seeds from the mother tree that they liked for whatever reason. So, you know, whenever planting is involved, there's always some kind of selection that's been involved. But we, at least as BIS, are not looking at replacing natural forests with plantations, because the whole point of, for us, commercializing wild plants is to conserve the biodiversity. So yeah, so that's why I was saying, you know, planting a tree here and there around, you know, around your homestead or around your gardens or your fields, fine, and there definitely selection is happening. But you know, I'm very scared of that's, we definitely not looking at replacing the natural forests with marilla plantations. I think that would defeat, for us at least, the entire point of why we're doing what we're doing.
Cool. Thank you, Caroline and Dr. Mujuru. Frank, I know you had a question earlier that you touched on a bit about communities involved in the commerce further, but I see you've got a comment. Would you like to unmute?
Sure, I can unmute. Hi, everybody. I think the comment was answered very well. The question about communities getting involved. Yeah. There's a whole layer of value chains, if you will, going from harvesting on site to a product that you would buy in Frankfurt or in Johannesburg or wherever. And I do a lot of that value chain closer to the ground, but it takes time and it takes capacity building. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I had also asked about access into parks, and there's been some good comments by people about that, so that they're worth looking at. You do have a big resource in national parks that people could access if we can get the regulations right, the access. I think Sue Sneyman mentioned that there was some lessons we could learn from Uganda that does this, and that sounds very good. My final comment I should just say about the discussion right now, communities, wildlife, keeping it wild, as Caroline was saying, sustainable offtake, fairness to the people, all those are interlocking issues that we need to address. And so what we're doing here, just now leading into the next week, is we started last week asking about community-based ownership, use rights. Now we're looking at a sector of plant commercialization. Now, how do we verify good practice? And what are the standards of good practice? And I will admit that I'm in Caroline's camp. We want to keep the stuff wild. We're not talking about farming these plants or farming animals for that matter, but about harvesting resources in a wild landscape with benefits to the people that live there. Okay, so that leads on to certification next week.
Cool, thank you, Frank. I see there's a really interesting conversation happening. I just want to read a comment from Louise. I know she works for SandParks. And she just answers a series of questions about harvesting natural resources within national parks. And she says it's not necessarily only because there may not be resources outside, but also to enhance various ways for people to benefit from the protected area in the context of historical redress. For these objectives, it does not even need to be at a large scale. Even small scale projects could work really well. Some examples include several national parks in South Africa with positive benefit sharing and relationship building outcomes. But of course, they require resources to manage. Partnerships and collaboration locally is important. And Sue, I know she's from the African Leadership University, also says that Uganda Wildlife Authority also allows community natural resource harvesting in their national park, and they report on the value of this in annual reports. And I know, Caroline, you'd spoken that you do not harvest plants and things in national parks, so maybe this is something to look at. But I do not see any questions in the chat, and I don't think I have missed anyone. If anyone has a last minute question, they can lift their hand. Otherwise, I'll be closing the conversation in about a minute. Oh, there's an interesting question from Chris, just on the last minute, that says, if wild trees are grown out of cuttings or modified means, will that still be considered as wild?
The origin is wild.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 3 minutes to 1 o'clock. I do not see any questions. So those asking for the recording will be available in about 7 days maximum on YouTube on ShareScreen Africa. So you can go and get it there. But in closing, there was a comment from Peter. And since we were looking at the Zimbabwe Biodiversity Report, Peter's comment makes for a good closing. He says, the parallels with wildlife exploitation are clear. So the methods that have been successful in that domain should be taken across to the plant domain. Involvement and education of the local communities is a fundamental necessity for success. And so I think with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you, Dr. Mujuri. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Patience, for having a conversation with me today. Thank you for teaching me. I think we've all learned something today. And to remind everybody, we have another talk next week, Thursday at the same time. So if you'd like to join us, please come at 12 o'clock. And yeah, have a good afternoon, everybody. Thank you.